Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. To take this huge stack of research, all the articles and analysis on the big topics, and just distill it. To give you the essential knowledge you need to be really thoroughly and thoughtfully informed. Today we are wrestling with a question that, frankly, carries a lot of anxiety with it, a lot of intellectual weight. Does our growing reliance on generative AI literally destroy the human brain? And when we say destroy, look, we're not talking about some kind of physical trauma. We're talking about something a lot more insidious. The fear that our minds, just through sheer convenience, are beginning to atrophy. We've gone through a massive body of new research on this, drawing from neuroscientists at MIT and Harvard, cognitive psychologists, educational researchers, all to unpack this anxiety. Our goal here is to get past the sensational headlines, the dystopian stuff, and really understand the actual cognitive mechanics at play. And here's the core finding, the crucial nuance, really, that has to frame this whole conversation. AI does not inflict physical brain damage.
But, and this is a big but, excessive reliance on these tools, using them as a complete replacement for your own intellectual effort. Well, that can and does lead to a measurable phenomenon researchers are calling cognitive atrophy. It's a weakening of the specific neural pathways and skills that we need for deep learning, for critical thinking, for long-term memory.
That word atrophy is really the key differentiator here. It changes the whole conversation from, some science fiction disaster movie to a real discussion about neurological efficiency, about adaptation. And what's so fascinating, if you put this into historical context, is that this worry, it's not new. It's centuries old. I mean, look back at similar technologies. Plato famously worried that the written word would destroy oral recall. He argued that people would just stop committing things to memory because, well, they could just look it up.
Wow, I never knew that.
And the printing press was criticized for overwhelming the mind. The calculator was going to destroy our ability to do mental math. Every single major intellectual leap has been met with the same legitimate fear of cognitive decline in one specific skill.
So the whole premise of this deep dive, then, is that the human brain isn't static.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally this incredibly plastic and adaptive thing. It's constantly rewiring itself.
Exactly. The brain is remarkably economical. These technologies don't destroy our capacity to think, but they do drastically change how we think, how we allocate our cognitive resources, what we prioritize, and what we, choose to delegate. That neuroplasticity, it's both the mechanism of the risk, because those unused pathways weaken, and it's the source of the solution, because they can be rebuilt. It's a huge shift in our intellectual ecology.
Okay, let's unpack that shift. Let's start with the biology of disuse. We need to understand the why convenience leads to weakening. So if the brain isn't being physically injured, why is this very clinical term atrophy being used? I mean, What is actually happening on a cellular level that makes those skills just diminish?
Well, it all comes down to the brain operating as an efficiency engine. Evolutionarily, our brain is incredibly expensive to run. It consumes a huge amount of our metabolic energy. So it adheres very strictly to the use it or lose it principle.
Use it or lose it.
Right. And neuroplasticity is a two-sided coin. On one side, if you practice a new skill, the neural circuits for that skill get stronger. They get myelinated, more efficient. But on the other side of that coin, if you stop performing a specific task, the brain begins a process called synaptic pruning. It's like clearing out an old, unused path in a forest.
Okay.
The brain recognizes that these functional connections, these complex pathways for, say, summarizing something deeply or structuring a piece of writing, they're just not being used anymore, so it deprioritizes them. The connections weaken, they become less myelinated, and that energy gets redirected somewhere else.
So it's not the brain cells themselves dying off, it's the lines of communication between them. They're getting degraded or slower. It takes more effort to use them when we finally try.
Precisely. If AI is consistently handling the cognitive heavy lifting, the pathways that are responsible for those tasks just don't fire. And over months, or even just weeks, this disuse leads to a measurable drop in efficiency. The destruction we're talking about is really the loss of optimal functional connectivity. It makes that intellectual muscle, that skill, weaker and slower when you try to use it without the digital help.
I think the physical muscle analogy is, it's useful. But maybe we should push on it a little. If I stop using my leg for a year, it atrophies, sure, but I'm still using my arm, so I'm just shifting the workload. If AI handles the synthesis, isn't my brain just freeing up energy for higher order thinking? Why is the atrophy necessarily a bad thing?
That is a critical question, and it really frames this whole debate between augmentation and replacement. The problem comes up when the task you've outsourced is actually foundational to the higher order task you think you're freeing up time for. So if you outsource the reading and the summarization, the data input, you are actively weakening the pathways that are necessary for synthesis and original insight. For the If you let AI write your first draft and structure your entire argument, your brain doesn't practice the difficult, error-filled process of forming a coherent narrative. And that process of narrative formation is the neural pathway we're worried about weakening. It's the difference between outsourcing, say, a basic arithmetic task versus outsourcing the entire design of a complex financial model. The second one requires a deep, internalized understanding.
And the practical name for all this outsourcing is cognitive offloading, which I think really captures that feeling of just delegating the hard mental work to a device.
Cognitive offloading is the behavioral driver of the atrophy. It's the act of handing off those complex, effortful intellectual tasks, problem solving, retaining knowledge, deep writing to an external tool. And when we do this, we are fundamentally bypassing what's called the productive struggle.
The productive struggle.
Yes. And this productive struggle is absolutely non-negotiable for deep learning. Learning doesn't happen when the answer just appears. It happens in the friction, the mistakes, the moments of confusion, and then that eventual satisfying resolution that comes from your own internal effort. By removing that struggle, the brain gets the outcome, the perfect summary, say, but it skips the crucial process of building the underlying mental models.
Can you elaborate on that? On mental models, what exactly are we failing to build?
A mental model is, well, it's essentially the conceptual architecture you build in your mind to represent how a complex system works. For example, a good coder doesn't just memorize syntax, they build a mental model of how data structures interact, how algorithms work, why specific functions might fail. When an AI instantly generates a complex block of code, the user gets the functional output, sure, but they haven't built the model.
So they can't fix it.
Exactly. They can't debug that code effectively when it breaks in a new or different context because they lack that internalized framework of why it even worked in the first place. You're achieving immediate efficiency, but you're losing the cognitive flexibility you need to apply that knowledge adaptively. It's trading long-term intellectual resilience for short-term speed.
That really makes the stakes clear. We're gaining speed, but we're sacrificing depth. We're sacrificing comprehension and, critically, the ability to transfer knowledge. You know the fact, but you don't know the system.
Precisely. You possess what's called meta-knowledge. You know the information exists and you know the tool that can get it for you, but you lack the integrated understanding that comes from that effortful consolidation. You become a highly efficient knowledge delivery system, but a perpetually shallow thinker.
And this is where the conversation moves from a theoretical risk to, well, to a measurable neurological reality. Researchers have actually monitored the brain activity of people using these AI tools, and the data on reduced cognitive effort it's just stunning.
It really is. It validates the whole atrophy hypothesis. Foundational work from researchers at MIT using EEG monitoring showed a very, very clear pattern. When participants used AI for complex tasks like writing an essay or synthesizing a problem, their brains were simply working less hard.
How much less?
Specifically, they documented a 32% lower cognitive load among the AI users compared to the people doing the same tasks on their own.
Wow, 32%.
That is a massive drop in their required mental exertion. The brain is engaging in significantly less information processing to get to the same output.
And the measurements went deeper than just the load, right? They were tracking connectivity.
Right.
So for our listeners who might not be neuroscience experts, how does an EEG measure brain connectivity? And why is finding that it was halved so alarming?
That's a great question. So EEG measures the electrical activity in the brain. Connectivity, in this context, just means the synchronized firing patterns between different regions of the brain. When you're doing a complex task like synthesizing a document, your prefrontal cortex, which handles executive functions, it needs to communicate robustly with other regions, like the hippocampus for memory and the parietal lobe for attention.
So all the parts are talking to each other.
Right. And the MIT study found that when AI assisted the task, that synchronized communication was almost halved, which suggests that the critical dialogue between, say, the executive function part of your brain and the memory centers, it just shuts down. Or it dramatically slows down because the AI is doing the synthesis for you. The pathways simply aren't being recruited for the job.
So the brain is effectively saying, okay, I don't need to engage my memory or my reasoning centers fully here because the AI has already structured the solution.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this reduced connectivity is the anatomical basis of atrophy. The pathways exist, but they're not being reinforced. And what's more, the researchers noted this reduced effort was focused specifically on the relevant cognitive load. That's the effort required to turn raw information into usable, structured knowledge. When the AI handles that transformation, the brain actively minimizes its own participation. It makes the user faster at the task, but fundamentally worse at the independent thought required to do it next time. This lack of engagement suggests a lasting change is being made by convenience.
So if cognitive offloading is the behavior and atrophy is the biological mechanism, let's now look at the specific measurable symptoms. Let's dive into the three major areas of decline that the data has identified. The first one, and maybe the most immediately dangerous, is the erosion of our critical thinking, of our independent judgment. AI is designed to sound so fluent, so authoritative, which just bypasses our natural instinct to check the facts.
This is driven by something called automation bias. It's a widely studied phenomenon. It's our psychological tendency to just uncritically trust information that comes from an automated system, even when our own human evidence suggests it's wrong.
Right.
And large language models make this so much worse because their output is so coherent, so smooth and confident, even when they are demonstrably wrong, even when they're, as we say, hallucinating. And when we humans accept that AI output without any rigorous verification, our epistemic vigilance atrophies. Epistemic vigilance is like your cognitive immune system. It's the set of skills we use to evaluate the credibility of sources, to filter fact from fiction, and to detect subtle biases.
So if the AI gives me a beautiful 5-paragraph summary of some complex policy, instead of me reading the 100-page document, I've skipped the entire process of analyzing the evidence, weighing the conflicting points, synthesizing the arguments myself. That's the shortcut trap.
It is the ultimate shortcut trap. And Harvard experts have been particularly vocal about the risks this poses, especially in higher education and professional fields. If you just accept the answer at face value, you dull the independent judgment you need to question the underlying assumptions. You stop being a critical analyst and you become just a receptor of an algorithmically processed truth.
Let's get granular on the data here.
Sure.
What are the measurable consequences of this decline in reasoning? I mean, what do the studies actually show?
We have very clear, very recent data on this. A 2023 educational study showed a direct link between heavy AI use in assignments and lower independent reasoning scores among students. But the longitudinal studies, the ones that track heavy AI users over a matter of months, they're even more concerning.
Okay.
One large study tracked participants using tools like ChatGPT for various professional and academic tasks, and they found a remarkable 23.6% drop in overall reasoning ability over the study period. And even more, they recorded a shocking 38% decline in long context comprehension.
38%.
Yes, which means users were rapidly losing their ability to track, integrate, and understand information when it was presented across lengthy reports or complex texts.
A nearly 40% decline in the comprehension of long, complex texts.
Yeah.
That feels like an existential threat to intellectual depth. For the listener, what does that 38% decline actually mean when you're faced with, say, a 50-page economic policy brief?
It means you rely entirely on the AI summary, period. And if that AI summary misses a key caveat, or if it misinterprets a nuance, the human simply lacks the internalized framework to spot the error. You're reading the summary, but the essential cognitive machinery you need to digest and challenge the original source, it's been degraded. Those analytical skills, the ability to spot inconsistencies, compare arguments, infer unstated assumptions, they're just not being exercised.
And there's a hard statistical measurement tying how often you use it to this skill loss.
Yes. One analysis reported a correlation of R equals 0.68 between frequent AI usage and critical thinking abilities. Now, for context, in social science and cognitive research, an R value that's that strongly negative, it indicates a powerful inverse relationship.
So a very strong link.
Very strong. The relationship is clear. The more you outsource your critical analysis to an AI, the weaker your own analytical abilities become. And this has profound professional implications. Imagine a financial analyst using an AI to generate risk models. If they simply accept the AI's recommendation without doing the due diligence, checking the data inputs, the model's assumptions, they're just substituting algorithmic confidence for their own professional expertise. This erodes those foundational analytical skills due to hidden biases, opaque outputs, and it turns the skilled analyst into an uncritical reviewer.
Okay, moving from critical thinking to memory. This feels like an amplification of something we've been living with for 2 decades now, the Google effect. And now
AI is. It's turbocharging that effect, leading to what's being called memory atrophy.
Absolutely. The Google effect taught our brains to remember where to find information, the search query, rather than the information itself. Generative AI takes this to a whole new level. Why retain a concept at all if the tool can instantly retrieve it, contextualize it, summarize it, even rewrite it for you? The brain, being efficient, it prioritizes remembering the source, the AI, over storing the actual data internally.
But the act of memory consolidation, of turning those short-term memories into accessible long-term knowledge,
Yeah.
that requires effort, right? We need that friction.
That is the absolute crux of memory science. Memory consolidation relies on active retrieval. That friction, the struggle of trying to recall a difficult name or a complex formula or a historical date, that is what signals the brain to reinforce that neural trace. When we outsource a recall to an AI, we bypass this vital consolidation process entirely. The information just it flows right past the deeper encoding mechanisms.
The data on content that users just finished generating it's just wild. The idea that you can write something and immediately forget it.
The study from MIT and Kimi on AI-assisted essay writing revealed this chilling finding. A staggering 83% of participants failed to recall sentences or ideas from their own content shortly after generating it with AI assistance.
83%.
They authored the output, but their brains did not encode the information because the necessary cognitive work was just skipped. The work passed through their hands without ever touching their minds, and this is completely corroborated by neuroimaging. Brain scans that were conducted during these tasks, they revealed measurable drops in activity in the regions that are essential for memory and complex thought. We're talking specifically about the hippocampus and the structures around it, which is the engine responsible for encoding new memories. Reduced activity there means less retention. It means a slower rate of converting new input into flexible, long-term knowledge.
And this leads us to what might be the hidden cost of memory offloading, losing the raw materials we need for creativity.
This is perhaps the most profound long-term risk to human innovation. Creativity isn't magic. It's often described as the spontaneous collision of two or more previously unrelated, distinct ideas that are stored deep within your long-term memory. It's the ability to forge an unexpected analogy or to combine disparate facts to form some novel solution. If users are relying on AI to organize and store and retrieve their facts, they simply accumulate fewer and shallower internal knowledge bases. And if you have fewer ideas, fewer facts, names, concepts, historical analogs stored internally, fewer raw materials, you drastically reduce the chance for that spontaneous insight. Creativity becomes something you prompt for, based on the external AI's database, rather than something that bubbles up naturally from a rich, dense internal life. We risk becoming excellent prompters, but very poor innovators.
The third major area, then, is the skill of attention itself.
Yeah.
These AI tools are optimized for instant gratification, and that just runs directly counter to what we need for deep thinking.
That instant gratification loop is an incredibly powerful psychological conditioner. AI delivers quick answers, precise summaries, rapid refinement. It eliminates those frustrating periods of confusion or slow progress that are actually necessary for true mastery. And this trains the brain to expect immediate cognitive closure. It reduces our tolerance for anything that requires slow, sustained work, what we might call deep reading or deep thinking.
Right.
The ability to maintain a linear focus on a complex thought for an extended period, blocking out distraction, that is a highly trained cognitive skill. And like any skill, it atrophies when it's constantly subjected to the rapid novel stimuli and the immediate rewards that are provided by this digital environment. Our patience for complexity just erodes.
I worry about the effect this has on reading, specifically. I mean, the effort it takes to track a complex argument over dozens of pages is immense, but it's also crucial.
It is. And that capacity for sustained linear attention is visible suffering. When the brain knows it can get the summarized, bullet-pointed version in 30 seconds, why would it exert the hour of effort needed to digest the source text? The result is that the mental muscle for holding that complex, sustained focus gets weaker.
And the neural evidence here shows something really alarming, that the brain doesn't just work less hard during the task, it stays sluggish after the task is done. That suggests a semi-permanent change.
That is the most alarming finding in the neuroscience of AI reliance, I think. EEG monitoring showed that AI users exhibited significantly lower brainwave activity during these tasks, specifically a reduction in alpha and theta waves.
And those are important.
Very. These wave patterns are crucial. Theta waves, in particular, are associated with deep internal focus, complex problem solving, even meditation. But what shocked the researchers was that this depressed, sluggish brain activity persisted even after the participants stopped using the AI and moved on to a completely unrelated task. It indicates that the brain didn't just immediately rebound. The neuroplastic changes that were induced by the convenience were lasting. They were essentially lowering the brain's baseline readiness for high-effort, deep engagement.
It sounds like the brain is recalibrating its operating capacity down to the level that's required by the convenience tool, even when the task at hand actually demands higher performance.
That's a very good way to see it. It's adapting to the path of least resistance. And we have a really compelling established analog for this. Extensive research has been done on heavy GPS reliance, which outsources our spatial navigation. That reliance has been shown to result in atrophy of the posterior hippocampus. Outsourcing navigation weakens our physical map-making abilities. It stands to reason that outsourcing core cognitive labor like reasoning, synthesis, and deep focus carries a similar profound atrophy risk for those specific neural circuits.
So the data is not just suggestive, it's a detailed mapping of skill loss. Now, let's widen the aperture a bit. Beyond our individual brain function, what are the behavioral and social risks we face as this reliance grows?
This section really addresses the unique nature of interacting with a highly specialized, language-based AI. Unlike human beings, these models are designed for an optimal user experience. They were infinitely patient, relentlessly agreeable, and perfectly centered on the user's needs and prompts. They're designed to minimize all friction.
Which, again, sounds ideal until you realize that friction is how human relationships actually develop.
Precisely. Real human relationships are messy. They're frustrating, and they often require massive cognitive and emotional effort. They demand compromise, the tolerance of conflict, the negotiation of competing needs, and sometimes just enduring periods of boredom or disagreement.
Yeah.
If an individual starts to replace significant, nuanced human interaction with AI interaction, which is a totally frictionless feedback loop, they risk a measurable degradation of their emotional resilience and empathy. Resilience is built by navigating conflict and disappointment. If you get accustomed to a conversation partner that never truly challenges you, then real human disagreement, a constructive argument, a simple misunderstanding, or just dealing with someone else's emotional distress, it all becomes exponentially harder to tolerate. The skill set that's required for human intimacy and social navigation starts to atrophy from disuse.
And can we talk about the loss of nuance? I mean, so much of human communication happens outside of the explicit text, the words themselves.
Absolutely.
All right.
Reading subtle human cues, understanding tone, interpreting body language, recognizing nonverbal signals of distress or sarcasm, that is a highly practiced, nuanced skill. It's something you learn through repetition and immersion in human communities.
Right.
With increased AI mediation in our communication, or even relying on AI for social scripting, this practice skill just weakens. Users lose their ability to interpret that implicit social language. It leads to communication that's shallower, less empathetic, and ultimately just less effective in a human context.
So this sounds like a societal loss of social dexterity, and it's being driven by the convenience of a perfectly curated digital friend.
It is a trade-off where we gain this superficial ease, but we lose deep relational competence. And what's more, AI companionship can reduce the incentive to even seek out diverse human experiences. Why endure the difficulty of a new social group or a challenging conversation when your AI companion can just perfectly reflect your existing worldview back to you? It reinforces isolation, and it calcifies our intellectual habits.
Let's look at the purely intellectual risks that arise when the output is so seamless. You mentioned the illusion of understanding, that feeling that you grasp a topic just because you skimmed a beautifully written summary.
That is intellectual complacency, and it's fueled by algorithmic fluency. Because the AI generates text that is so coherent, so authoritative, and linguistically flawless, it fosters a false sense of expertise. Users believe they have done the work of synthesis simply because they have consumed the output, and this leads to a pervasive copy-paste mentality. The intellectual effort gets diverted away from the hard work of synthesizing and creating, and instead it's channeled toward just basic consumption. The user remains perpetually at the surface level, mistaking fluency for foundational knowledge.
And this complacency feeds right into the problem of black box reliance. We stop asking the most critical question: how do I know this is true?
That's the core danger of these opaque outputs. When you accept an AI's answers without any visibility into its sources, or the weights, or the algorithms used to construct the response, you surrender your fundamental intellectual instinct to question. You're accepting a result that came from a black box. This weakens the habit of skepticism, the instinct for validation, and the essential cognitive function of critical inquiry. We stop asking, is this based on peer-reviewed science or on a conspiracy theory forum that just happened to be highly indexed because the output sounds factual?
And this also reinforces the feedback loops we already see online, creating these intellectual echo chambers.
Absolutely. This leads directly to algorithmic narrowing. AI systems, especially the ones that tailor content and recommendations, are designed to reinforce your past behavior. So if you only see content that aligns with your existing biases or interests, you create these intellectual filter bubbles. The atrophy risk here is that the neural pathways responsible for generating counterarguments, for tolerating ambiguity, for synthesizing opposing viewpoints, they weaken from disuse. When the system never challenges your thinking becomes less flexible, more polarized, and less capable of nuance. The collective intellectual agility decreases as we all retreat into our comfortable, self-reinforcing information environments.
Finally, we have to talk about the psychological dependency that comes from outsourcing all this effort and discomfort. Convenience is highly addictive.
It is, and the brain adapts to convenience with incredible speed. This creates a psychological dependency loop. The immediate ease of using AI leads to rapid dependence. That dependence leads to high anxiety or helplessness when the tool is unavailable, and then that anxiety drives deeper reliance on the tool. This strongly mirrors established addiction patterns, where the brain is rewarded with a quick hit of dopamine cognitive satisfaction without the commensurate, sustained effort that's required for a natural reward. And we also have to address the really severe concerns around generative AI in sensitive mental health contexts. Studies have shown that while an AI can offer surface-level advice, it often fails profoundly in complex or sensitive scenarios, like simulating therapy or handling acute distress. AI just lacks the capacity for true relational empathy, for moral reasoning, for professional nuance.
So someone turns to an AI for emotional regulation, maybe looking for comfort, but they risk encountering outputs that are simplistic or biased or even potentially harmful.
Precisely. The risk is twofold. First, the failure of the tool in a sensitive context can actually exacerbate existing harmful thought patterns. And second, and this is more important for our discussion on atrophy, replacing the internal work of emotional processing, which requires reflection, sitting with discomfort, navigating existential difficulty, with a frictionless AI substitute. It prevents the user from building true emotional regulation skills. Growth often requires confronting silence and discomfort. And if AI replaces that necessary internal labor, the self-authoring capability of the mind just diminishes.
This is a powerful challenge. We've established the neurological mechanism, the measurable decline in specific skills, and the wider behavioral risks. So the question now is, how do we live with this powerful addictive tool without becoming intellectually impoverished? The technology isn't going anywhere. We can't rewind the clock. So if we want to safeguard our cognition, we need a strategy. We need a way for intentional interaction. And let's start with the good news, the reversibility of this atrophy.
This is the single most crucial point for you, the listener, to internalize. The brain is profoundly plastic. The cognitive weakening we've been discussing, the atrophy, it's the weakening of neural connections, not physical destruction. It is therefore fundamentally reversible. You can rebuild those pathways by exercising them again.
So we're not permanently damaged, but we have to acknowledge that the effort required to fix the damage might be pretty significant, especially if we've been relying on AI for months or even years.
That leads to a very helpful concept researchers are now calling cognitive debt.
Cognitive debt.
It's the accumulated cost of all your outsourced cognition. So if you have spent a year relying on AI to structure your arguments, perform your complex research synthesis, and draft your conclusions, your brain has accrued a debt of unperformed labor. And that debt persists even after you stop using the AI. You can't just wake up one morning and expect your deep reasoning skills to be back at their peak level instantly. You have to proactively pay back that debt by intentionally forcing yourself back into the productive struggle. This might mean deciding to summarize a 50-page document by hand before you ever ask the AI for help, or coding a complex function on your own, even if it takes you 5 times longer. That intentional friction is the repayment mechanism.
So that makes the solution sound like cognitive rehabilitation. like a deliberate training regimen to reactivate those dormant pathways.
It is exactly that. It means understanding that your brain does what you train it to do. If you train it to delegate, it becomes a brilliant delegator but a poor performer. If you intentionally force it to perform the difficult, the complex, the slow tasks, the pathways will strengthen again.
Let's use that powerful analogy. AI is a cognitive prosthetic. The entire future of our intellect really seems to depend on whether we treat it as a tool for augmentation or a crutch for replacement.
This is the definitive philosophical and practical divide. If AI is used as a complete replacement generating complex reports from a simple prompt, providing instant solutions to difficult analytical problems, it acts as a crutch. The user becomes dependent and the atrophy accelerates because the core skill is never engaged. However, thoughtful, deliberate AI use can lead to powerful augmentation. AI excels at routine tasks. Data sorting, finding preliminary facts, outlining basic structures, generating simple summaries of complex data. When AI handles that grunt work, the human mind is freed up for the higher order thinking, developing strategy, engaging in truly novel creativity, performing ethical reasoning, and achieving original synthesis that connects previously unconnected human experiences.
The key then is defining that boundary. We use AI to clear the path, not to walk the path for us.
Precisely. You use AI to challenge your ideas, not to replace them. For example, instead of asking AI, write me an argument about X, you should ask, here's my argument about X. What are the 3 weakest points? What is the strongest counterargument that I haven't considered? You're using the tool to sharpen your existing reasoning, not to generate the reasoning itself. You shift from being a passive consumer of algorithmic output to an active editor and a critical sparring partner.
So this is the most actionable part of our discussion. For the listener at home who wants to maintain their intellectual rigor in this new landscape, what are the specific friction-introducing habits we need to adopt?
We need to adopt what you could call a friction-first methodology. The primary rule is, think first, ask AI second. Before you even open the generative tool for any complex task writing, analysis, problem solving, you must first articulate the structure, define the core problem, or draft the main points in your own head or on paper. This ensures that the genesis of the thought, the difficult part of organizing and defining, remains an internal cognitive activity.
And we need to build that struggle buffer we talked about earlier. We have to resist that impulse to immediately outsource the very moment we feel confused or blocked.
Absolutely. Experts advise setting a designated struggle time buffer of 30 to 60 minutes before seeking AI assistance for a truly challenging problem. That mandated struggle time is where the learning happens. It's the period that forces the brain to recruit those deep focus and problem-solving pathways that are so critical for long-term skill development. Bypassing that friction is bypassing growth. And furthermore, you should always treat the AI output as a starting point, never as a final truth. Adopt the mentality of a verification officer. Never outsource the habit of skepticism or inquiry. If the AI provides an answer, your job is to ask, what are the source assumptions? What evidence did it ignore? Where does this conclusion break down in a different context?
We should pair the AI output with a required reflection phase, a discussion phase, to ensure that the content is encoded and synthesized by us and not just passively consumed.
That is the ultimate goal. Using the tool to expand the scope of problems you can handle, but retaining absolute authorship and verification over the mental processes required to solve them. You use AI to enhance your capabilities, but you never delegate the effort that's required for intellectual integrity.
This deep dive into cognitive atrophy, it provides a very clear, data-driven message. The danger is not inherent in the technology itself. It's capable of remarkable things. The danger lies in the sheer comfort and the extreme efficiency it offers, which fosters cognitive laziness and an incremental, slow loss of our own intellectual authorship. The choice for all of us is stark. Are we using AI to perform the work for us, or are we using it strategically to elevate our own performance to levels we couldn't achieve alone?
The future of human thinking rests entirely on the conscious choices we're making right now. If we choose convenience over effort, we risk a generation of thinkers who are fast consumers of information, but poor generators of original thought. If we choose intentional friction, using AI as a critical partner and an augmentation tool, we really stand to unlock unprecedented intellectual potential.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over in the coming days, one that connects memory, creativity, and knowledge. If true creativity is defined as the unique, spontaneous collision of 2 or more unrelated ideas stored deep in the internal reservoirs of our long-term memory, and reliance on outsourced memory leads to a measurably shallower internal pool of knowledge, what happens to human innovation? The kind that truly shifts paradigms in a generation defined by the outsourced mind. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this information empowers you to navigate the digital world with greater intention and intellectual rigor. Until next time, keep thinking for yourself.